So you've got this very unique time where people are not being distracted by anything else. They're on the Uber app. They are in a car. They're going somewhere to an important cultural moment for them or a social moment for them. That's a different way of approaching media perhaps than there's been before. And we have to keep educating on that base.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Identity Architects, the InfoSum podcast that spotlights the leaders in the media industry shaping the future of data-driven advertising. I'm your host Ben Cicchetti, and this week I had the opportunity to sit down with Paul Wright, Head of International Uber Advertising at Uber. Together, Paul and I dig into the Uber advertising proposition, how Uber is prioritizing consumer privacy, the evolution of retail media and commerce media, Paul's superpower, and much, much more. Before we jump into that conversation, this is a reminder to hit that subscribe button to be alerted when new episodes of Identity Architects are available. But without any further delay, here's my chat with Paul. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Paul Wright, Head of International Uber Advertising at Uber. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ben. Nice to be here.
No, I'm thrilled to get the opportunity to pick your brains. But for anyone who might be unfamiliar, can you just give me a quick introduction to yourself, but also to Uber advertising that I know we're going to dig into a lot more detail on later?
So my role at Uber is to look after the international teams at Uber's ad sales teams, which is across EMEA and APAC. Uber Ads has been going for just under 3 years now, I guess, and runs across three parts of Uber, but two parts of both apps, but three parts in many ways. So you have what happens on Uber Eats and what happens on Uber Rides. And then within that, we have three teams. One team that looks after our restaurant partnerships, so our convenience delivery restaurant partners. One team that looks after our CPG or FMCG partners, depending on which side of the pond you come from. And then the other one looks after our non-endemic advertisers, so people who want to access our audiences across different surfaces within the Uber app, but are not in the marketplace or on the platform. So those could be, brand advertisers who want to engage with us. So we have three teams doing that across multiple markets.
Interesting. Well, we've definitely got a lot to cover off, but we'll start the way we always do, which is with a series of quick-fire questions to get to know you, Paul, a little bit better, starting with what is your earliest memory of advertising?
My earliest, I think I remember the launch of Channel 4, which was quite interesting. I don't remember, TV before that was ITV was the only ad platform I ever saw, so I guess that was fine. But I do remember the launch of Channel 4 because it was quite a big moment. There was only three channels and they went to four. And it was like a big thing. And I remember advertising within that on things like The Tube and various other shows that were on the first couple of days. So I guess that's what it was. That's the moment.
Yeah. So I guess if you take yourself back to those days, to the launch of Channel 4, what did you want to be when you were younger, when you were growing up?
Well, this is the funny thing, because my mum always said that I was an advertiser's dream because of all the things that I'd seen. I was always referencing advertising to her somehow, I think. But I don't think I ever thought I was going to be in advertising when I was there, when I was going to school or when I was at university. I was like, I was doing a geography degree. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So just fell into it to some degree.
Well, we're all glad that you did fall into it. So what was your first job in either advertising or marketing?
Well, my first job, my first ever job was in Lloyds Bank. So I came out of university, went to Lloyds Bank, and a friend of mine was working at Sky Channel and told me about a job at Sky Channel because the banking wasn't working for me. And I got an interview to go and be a sales assistant at Sky Channel as it was then. It became Sky TV after that, and then became Sky B subsequently. And I had no idea what I was going to get myself into, but I just knew it was an apprenticeship. And the guy who interviewed me said, well, if you're crazy enough to give up banking and come into work for a TV station, then I'll give you the job. So that was my first job. And it was very, very admin heavy. It was basically helping the sales team activate the bookings that they had.
Interesting. So what do you think it was that drew you in? Obviously, you mentioned your mum said you were kind of an advertiser's dream. So what do you think it was that drew you into the industry? And then what do you think keeps you in it to this very day?
Well, it's I think it comes up from a lot of an interest in behavior of humans, I think, because I did a geography degree, which is a lot of that was about that. And I just found it quite interesting, this idea that you could place messaging in front of people to try and change their behavior slightly to purchase something. So I think that was the thing that drew me in. What I didn't realize And what I love about the industry is the variety of people you meet. And that's the thing that I sort of picked up pretty rapidly when I first joined. And some of those people are still in the industry that I joined with. Many have left now, but it's always been very social. It's a very social industry in that sense. And it's a constantly changing industry, which is also another thing that appeals, because I've done a lot of startups, a lot of builds, and various other things. I like doing the new stuff as well. So those things all matter to me, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely think we're a very people-driven business, and you must get to meet people at various stages of their careers. So what advice would you give to someone who's maybe just starting their career in media and advertising?
I mean, I think the key thing for me is keep learning, because there's always so much to learn in this space. What gets you to one place isn't going to get you to the next place. I mean, there's been so much change when I started in TV advertising, and now also in digital. Even in digital, there's been immense change. So you have to keep learning, keep building your networks, and keep as humble as you can be, because you have no idea what's going to happen next. And I think, there's been a lot of, as I said, the change is constant. So you have to keep navigating that from a career perspective.
Yeah, you almost need to embrace the change, I think is the
Yes.
thing, right? Because
Yeah,
we
I think
are
so.
an ever
Yeah.
evolving industry. And if you can thrive in that environment, this is the perfect industry for you. A two-part question. What keeps you awake at night? And then what gets you up in the morning? What gets you motivated in the morning?
Well, the motivation, I think the motivation is really easy. I've got a wonderful team. I'm building this team, helping build this team, in what is, I think, quite a unique proposition in the marketplace, which is helpful. And that's great. And it's just, there's so much new stuff we keep doing every day that you just keep going. I think what keeps me awake at night is a sort of longer term thing. I think one of the things that we never, looking back on my time on the web, we never really realized that advertising impact in the way it was going to be utilized to drive drive content. And what do I mean by that? Well, I remember being way back when we relaunched Sky News back in the day, and this is a long time ago now. And obviously our key metric was to try and optimize for ads and optimize for clicks. And I think to some degree that's been a bit of a challenge for us as a business, because we've been optimizing for engagement rather than for the right thing. And that doesn't necessarily, good engagement doesn't necessarily equal great content sometimes. So I think the thing that was always worried me is how that's worked. And I think we've got a long way to go to how we manage, quality content versus content that creates reaction, because advertising is funding it at the back end.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. You kind of alluded to just how complex our industry is, right? And it's evolved dramatically over the last few years. How would you describe what you do within media and advertising to a 10-year-old?
Well, you could say you sell. I mean, you can try and I think you try and simplify it, obviously, but essentially, I mean, I would describe what I do is we put messages in front of people at key moments, and advertisers want to buy those key moments, and those key moments could be you're going to a party, you're going to an airport, that type of thing. So I think for us, explaining it for Uber is probably a little bit easier than if you were having to explain it from a pure ad tech play, which gets way more complicated. Having worked in ad tech, and well, I think even my family still never understood what I did, despite my attempts to try to prove it. So I think it's a little bit easier with a brand like Uber, because I think it's clearer, whereas perhaps for lots of others it's a bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. At least people have heard of Uber, I guess, is the big benefit that you have.
I've heard of you used it, so that
Yeah,
you're halfway there. Because I think the thing with ad tech is always this thing about it's the plumbing at the back end, and no one really understands plumbing. Like you wouldn't understand the plumbing of your house. I don't understand how the plumbing of the house works. I just know it's there. I think that's always a bit of a challenge, the way the advertising ecosystem has become, because with technology. I mean, when I first started in TV, no one ever asked me how the hell we got a commercial on air. because that wasn't really relevant. But to some degree, with the digital ad space, we have to worry about how the ad gets to the place, and that's a much more complex explanation than perhaps we're used to.
Yeah, agreed. The last of our quickfire questions, and it's a personal favorite of mine, although I am quickly learning it's not a personal favorite of everyone that I interview on the podcast. If there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
This is such a difficult one. So I'm a massive music fan, so I have a very big music collection, and therefore my favorite song at any one time changes all the time. I think there's always a great song, which I remember as a teenager, which was always a fun one, because when you're a teenager, you're obviously full of angst and various other things. And it's the Tom Petty song called Even the Losers, because there's a great line in it that says, even the losers get lucky sometime, which I think is quite a positive way of thinking about it when you're a teenager. And it's a sort of, it's a song, that sort of thing about this guy who finds a girlfriend and all this type of stuff. And it's quite sort of sunny, but then this sort of, slightly nice angle. So I think that's always quite a good way of thinking about life.
Yeah, I love that. Look, we have a playlist on Spotify where we add everyone's choices, so we will add that to the list, and people can enjoy it. That's an awesome choice. We'll move on to some of the more topic-related questions, but I think something you've just touched on. Obviously, everyone listening to this podcast probably knows who Uber is. They've been in an Uber, they've ordered food from Uber Eats. But for anyone who might be unfamiliar with the advertising side, can you just cover what the opportunities are with Uber advertising for brands?
Yes, of course. So we started, I'll go through our sort of mini history. So we started with advertising in our marketplace for restaurant partners. And actually it's very subtle. It's the ability for restaurant partners to promote themselves to you because you're local to a certain area and they've got an offer or a store that they want to promote to you. So it's a sponsored listings business. So that's how we started. That's gone incredibly well. We have a large number of restaurant partners on our platform utilizing that. So that's the sort of marketplace starting point. And you'll see it on the screens, sponsored items, sponsored listings, you'll see those things. Once we started with that, we then decided to build the ad business more holistically. And we started in two other areas. One was what we were going to do in the rides business. So when you're taking a ride, could we insert an ad into that app experience that was non-interruptive, but one that would benefit both the advertiser and the user? So we started running those ads, and that's become a very important part of our business now. We call them journey ads. They're essentially premium messaging to the platform, which basically goes, you as an advertiser own one trip. So there's only one trip, one advertiser per trip. So it's a very uncluttered environment. You know the experience. When you order an Uber, you have a dispatch screen that says, we are looking for a driver for you. We place an ad in there, which is swipeable and non-clickable. Then when the driver's confirmed, we have a little map coming up. So the driver's coming to pick you up. We place an ad in there, and that is clickable. And then we also, once you're in the car, have a further ad, which is the ad that then you go see when you're checking on how you're doing or how much time it's going to be before you arrive at your destination. That is clickable. But that whole set of 3 units essentially is owned by one advertiser. Mm-hmm. And we came up with this model which we charge on a cost per trip basis. So people pay per trip that they buy. But those trips can be targeted very, very interestingly. We can use very simple data points. So, you go into an airport, that's a data point. That's pretty straightforward. You know what happens when people go to airports. They go through security and they go through duty free. So we have a lot of advertisers who are interested in that. Equally, if you're going to a concert or you're going to a restaurant or a bar, there's a whole heap of things that go with that. So we've created this model that's working incredibly well. We have a lot of brands utilizing that, both our restaurant brands, our CPG brands, as well as our non-endemic brands. They all use that surface. And we think one of the key things about it is the attention time, because the average attention is, the average time spent in the ads is about 100 seconds. The click rates are anything up to 2 to 2.5%. So you're getting a long engagement and you're getting good clicks. Now, obviously, there's also some smart targeting that helps those engagements, because obviously if you're targeting people who are interested in music and they're going to a music venue, then you're more likely to get greater engagement anyway by default. So that's that one. And then we do brand lift studies and various other things on that. And then we have other surfaces and other solutions for other brands. So if you're a CPG brand, you can buy sponsored listings, you can buy sponsored items, which we partner with Criteo. So that's menu items in the Uber Eats feed. You can buy post checkout, and post checkout is the time when you ordered your delivery on Uber Eats and you're waiting for that. So it's very similar to the rides experience. It's that attention time when you're looking for the driver, waiting to see the delivery. And a variety of other things that we're looking at, across that, which includes offers and various other things. So there's a whole range of surfaces that we do. The principle with Uber is always one, we want to make it good for the user. So they're not interruptive in the way that they get in the way of your Uber experience. Two, we're very careful with data. We talked about this in the InfoSum as well, didn't we? We're very careful with data in terms of what we use data for. And that we always come up with formats which we think are appropriate for the platform. It's like, we're not going to force a format on. We've done some testing with video formats and stuff, but again, we have to recognize that video in that experience and an Uber experience is slightly different. But obviously, we've got great first-party data, so that helps. And we're building this ecosystem across all these different areas for different brands. And so far, so good. Obviously, it's been fantastic take up and we're in a good place.
Yeah, I love that you're already touching on the fact that it was really important, obviously, to Uber for this to be a really customer-centric offering. And I'm sure you'll agree that Uber comes with it a ton of brand equity. It's a cool, disruptive brand that consumers trust and love. So how do you protect that brand equity and keep the consumer central in what you're doing from an advertising perspective?
I think there's several things. Firstly, how we use data is important. So we have various data sets we don't use. So we have, just on the rise side, a number of Uber is obviously taking people to hospitals or clinics. Now, we as an advertiser, if we were a pure advertising business, we would probably want to use that data. We've made a decision as a business that we don't want to use that data because we don't think that's the right thing to do. We talk about, doing the right thing, and it's important that we do the right thing. So I think from a consumer point of view, doing the right thing is important both on the data side, but then on the experience side, because if anything was to get in the way of your Uber experience, then the advertiser's not going to be happy, the consumer's not going to be happy, and we as a business are not going to be happy. So we've done a lot of work just to make sure that things are smooth. It's a smooth thing. We're adding an ad format or placing an ad in an existing feed. We're not interrupting the user experience so they get tripped over by it or asking them to do something before they get the next thing, which you do see on some publisher sites, of course. So I think just not being an ad business gives us that ability to think that way sometimes. And it's very much a conversation we have all the time. And we also don't run a heavy ad loads anyway on our pages. So, if you're an Uber rider, you won't get huge volumes of ads at any one time, because of the nature of the way we do targeting and the amount of volume that we place against advertising relative to other promotions we may want to run.
Yeah. I think because you're, to the advertising ecosystem, obviously Uber is a relative newcomer, and therefore you get to kind of rewrite the rules a little bit and do things the way that you, Uber, want to do things. But there also must come with it some unexpected challenges when launching a new business and disrupting the ecosystem.
Yes.
So how have you overcome those barriers to entry in such a competitive landscape?
Well, I think the first thing is some brands take us as an innovation play. So of course, and we're still, I think we're still to some degree in that. When we first launched, we were definitely innovation play. So that allows you to experiment with brands quite quickly in terms of what you're trying to do. I think that was one way we started. I think way we've overcome other challenges, because I think some people would like us to fit into a box that they have already made. And we don't always do that for some of our services anyway. And we're like, well, fine, but just because that you've got that box doesn't mean to say that box is right for us. So we had to, I think, in some areas, spend a bit of time just educating people to the value of the proposition, regardless of the transactional nature of how it's done. As I said, we on the Uber ride side, we run on a cost per trip model. Now, a lot of people come to us and would like us to do it in a different way, but we don't think there is a different way for that, because it's, if you own a ride, it's a very different experience than buying one single banner on a page and waiting for it to be refreshed. So we've had to go through a lot of work on that. We've done a lot of research work on the benefits of that. And I think the advertising community is beginning to realize that there's real value in it, particularly when you combine it with the great first-party data we have. That being said, we will still have to build and we still have to convince. But we'll just carry on doing that. I think as I said, the great strength we have is obviously, as you said, Ben, we have a strong brand, but we also have very strong data. And the data is pretty unique. If you think about it on a global basis, yes, we have competitors in different areas, but they're not competitors across the piece in the way that we probably have, other people have. So we can do a lot of innovative stuff, I believe, across the platform.
Yeah, and you just touched on that data asset, which obviously can be used to drive incredible innovation, but also it's just a commercially incredibly valuable business asset. First-party data is now an incredibly valuable business asset. So how do you go about disrupting and innovating while protecting that asset at all costs?
I think we'd just be cautious, not cautious in a bad way, but cautious we're moving at speed, absolutely. But being cautious about what the right thing. I mean, everyone would love to come to us and say, just hand over your data. And we're like, yeah, fine, but that ain't going to happen. So I think there's a sort of recognizing what people may ask for in the ad business may not be what we want to do as a business. Just controlling that, then providing great case studies and explanations of what we currently do, and then adapting our platform according to what is needed to make that happen on more scale. And, I think we've done all of those things. I remember first going out, and it reminds me actually of my early days of Sky. A similar thing happened. The early days of Sky, we went out and people go, we don't want more TV. And we're like, okay, fine. And eventually Sky proved very, very successfully, because it's got a very big ad business now, that actually the Sky audience was a different type of audience to what was traditional TV viewers. And still is to some degree, because they are younger, more affluent, whatever. And I think this is what comes down here is you've got this very unique time where people are not being distracted by anything else. They're on the Uber app. They are in a car. They're going somewhere to an important cultural moment for them or a social moment for them. That's a different way of approaching media perhaps than there's been before. And we have to keep educating on that basis.
Yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned a couple of times, you mentioned it again there, is this idea of something I'm obsessed with as a marketer, which is moments-based marketing. How is Uber unlocking that for marketers? And what role does the data and technology play in helping marketers to identify and capitalize on those moments?
Well, we have a lot of data, obviously. I mean, if we talk about Christmas, we see growth in particular. We have a lot of data in terms of where we see growth. So, for example, number of Uber rides goes up to the end of December when we're recording this. A number of airport trips goes up because people are more traveling. So there's a lot of data that it shows the engagement changes at different times. Same with Halloween. Interestingly, on Halloween, and I can't remember the precise data on Halloween, but there's a big uptick on the Saturday of Halloween when all the parties are. So there's a lot of insights we can provide on behavioral insights, looking back at people's previous behavior as well, all that type of stuff that we can sort of help educate the market about how this is going to work and these moments, when these moments are going to be. And some of those moments are actually different moments to others. I mean, we have a very big New Year's Eve. Of course we do, because obviously lots of people take New Year's Eve Ubers to places. That's an opportunity, potentially, but not necessarily. Brands need to think that one through. We need to educate them in terms of when our moments are and then see whether they fit with their moments. But I think there is a lot there. And I think more and more advertisers are beginning to realize that, this idea that the funnel and all that type of stuff probably doesn't really exist in the same way. It's how do you get standout in a key moment, and then how do you where do you place your ads to get that to happen?
Yeah, I love that. And look, it wouldn't be a podcast in 2024 if we didn't touch on retail media, which just continues to be one of the biggest topics. I've heard you speak about it a couple of times now, but I think there's obviously this broader topic, which is commerce media as a whole. How, as we head into 2025, how do you see commerce media evolving? And are there any immediate opportunities that you just think are completely untapped?
I think commerce media has sort of been around for on and off for a bit, right? It's not like it's totally new. We have had travel ad networks before, but, now we have United and other people doing their commerce platforms. We have had people doing financial ads before, and now we have PayPal and others coming into the space. So I think this is more, the time is right for these networks to work, than was before. And I think, obviously the data is strong. The interest from advertisers is strong, going back to these moments pieces and all that type of stuff. I think there's some challenges with it. The volume of networks coming out now is probably going to be a challenge. And that's something that everyone's going to have to face next year, is how many networks do you really want to work with? Because just because they're there doesn't necessarily mean that there's demand for what they have to offer. They've got to create demand. And they've got to stand out, and then they've got to have scale of audience as well. So I think next year is going to be very interesting, because a lot of people are on the journey. The question then is, what's going to happen next? Is there going to be continued growth, or is there going to be some sort of consolidation where there'll be some bigger players and there'll be some smaller players that may have to aggregate together under an app network type model? But the data element is obviously going to be a key driver, because despite what Google may or may not do with Chrome and everything, we've sort of gone down that rabbit hole now anyway. So we're dealing with the fact that first-party data is much more valuable, and advertisers want more of it, and they can see value from it. And it was interesting. I was talking to a brand recently, and they were saying they regard retail media as a sense of giving them a bunch of signals they've never had for their brand activations. And I think that's probably the more fundamental thing in all of this, is suddenly brands who haven't really had much understanding of what their media has done directly anywhere can start to see some signals that in a way that they haven't seen before. And that's going to be a very powerful part of next year's learning. And, planners start using that data as well. It starts changing the way people get stuff, I guess.
Yeah, super interesting. It should be an interesting 2025 from a number of dimensions, yes. But definitely as we see retail media and commerce media and other kind of opportunities evolve. I could talk to you about Uber and retail media and commerce media all day, but as an LGBTQ plus leader, I'm always intrigued to dig a bit deeper into the people behind the ad tech. And you've spoken about neurodiversity before and described dyslexia as your superpower, which I love. Why was it important for you to be open about your dyslexia, and how has it shaped your journey to become the superpower that you now describe it as?
Well, I'll tell you why was I keen? I think the thing about neurodiversity is generally, and dyslexia specifically for me, it's just not something that gets talked about much, actually. It's one of those things that, and I think my biggest challenge was when I was at Amazon. And Amazon has this culture around documents. And documents, you're basically given a document at the beginning of a meeting, and then you're expected to read that document and comment on that document after 25 minutes of reading. Now, I'm a reasonably quick reader for a dyslexic, but I'm not that quick. And also, the other thing with dyslexic people is they don't tend to absorb the information in the same way or at the same pace as other people might do. So I would prefer to read it 3 or 4 times and get my head around it and whatever. By that stage, the meeting's over and it's done for. And I remember trying to get some sort of help to make this easier for me, and it didn't really work out. So when I came out of Amazon, I was always quite interested in this whole thing, because I was thinking, well, this missed opportunity maybe here, that there's a lot of people who've got interesting skills, but are not necessarily being recognised within this sort of process that is being created. So I decided to come out and talk about it. I have 2 kids who are dyslexic as well, so it's fairly prevalent within the family. And I started talking about it, and I didn't realize, I think, at the time that no one really talked about it, perhaps as much as I thought. I got great response from it, which is really powerful and helpful. And I've always been I've always been into diversity stuff anyway, but I hadn't really done it around myself. I'd always done it to try and work on the things. So it's been fascinating, and I do think, particularly in the world we are moving into, a lot of the skill sets that dyslexic, neurodiverse people have are really, really important. I mean, that there's a lot of evidence of, skill sets in programming languages and those types of things that certain neurodiverse groups are really good at. The dyslexics, the really interesting about dyslexics is something like 45% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic.
Wow.
Which is way outside of what they represent as the total population, which suggests there's something there, right? There's something, and then this goes to the superpower bit, because I think one of the great things with dyslexia is that ability to be able to join lots of big issues together into a big strategic thought process, which I think is going to get increasingly important, particularly in a world where AI is going to take over bits and bobs of things. It's how everything fits together and where is it going to go. And there's a great book by a guy called Ronald Cohen, who's one of the guys who founded Apex Partners, one of the first VCs.
Okay.
It's quite an old book now. It's called Second Bounce to the Ball. And his principle was great entrepreneurs were people who could see where the ball bounced second, not where the ball bounced first.
I love that
way of thinking of things, right? And dyslexic people probably in this instance have an ability to, if they can see the bigger picture, then that's potentially why they are disproportionately entrepreneurial. I mean, I don't know. But I think it's good. I mean, I'm working with, there's a neurodiversity and media group now as well, which we're doing some work on that. And that's good. And I think we'll keep going because I think the challenge really now, and you know this from your background as well, is then educating people in businesses about the benefits rather than the negatives. They may not be able to spell everything properly in emails. I'm terrible at emails. My emails are always missing words or whatever. And some people take that as a bad judgment. And I'm like, no, it's not bad. It's just because I'm dyslexic. It's just the way it is. Sometimes I can't see that word. But that doesn't mean to say I can't communicate with people and I can't do what you need me to do as a job. So we need to do more educational on that, and particularly with the education system as well. The education system also tends not to favour dyslexics, and I've seen that with my kids. That they were, easily put into it not going quite so well bucket, rather than actually how do we make this work better bucket. So I'm just going to keep working on it while I can. It's been fun so far. And I'm nicely surprised with the reaction from it.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing what you're doing and what the group is doing. I think, to your point, visibility is just so important around things that are visible, but also things that aren't visible. People being able to see someone like yourself who is being incredibly successful in their career is just really inspiring to others who might be just coming into this industry concerned about kind of their prospects. So I just think it's incredibly important. And as someone who has embraced that fully and turned it into a strength, you touched on businesses. What advice would you give to organizations or leaders that might be listening to this podcast who want to create a more inclusive environment that empowers neurodivergent people to thrive within their organization?
I think the starting point is to understand people best. I mean, I think when I was doing hiring for the UK team for Uber Ads, we insisted that it was a diverse group. And that's what we wanted to hire for. And that was diversity of experience, diversity of everything. And it's one of the most diverse teams I've ever run. It's also one of the strongest teams in that sense, because it is so diverse. And that encourages people to understand the differences between each other and thrive off that. But I also think there's this point you just made about openness, because I think the openness thing is really important, because if people don't, accept the differences between people because people aren't comfortable enough to share that within their environment, then it becomes much harder. So we actively, I mean, I've got in the UK team, we've got three ERG leads already in the UK ads team. Team's only been together 18 months, and they're the ERG leads for wider Uber. It's not just the ads team. So we just want to encourage, I think, just positive encouragement rather than, the sort of more controlled, we don't really want to talk about that because it's a bit complicated. I mean, none of us are going to get this 100% right at any one time. It's just, but we have to learn and we have to get on with it. But celebrating the differences is I think as important as anything.
Yeah, I love that. Celebrating the differences. That's a great way to look at everything we're doing. Before we wrap things up on the podcast, is there anything we haven't touched on that you wanted to add, or anything we should dive into any deeper?
Don't think so. I don't think there's much there that, we've covered a lot of things, but to be fair, in a wide range of things from Tom Petty to here, right? So,
no, I agree. This has been awesome, and it's great to one of the privileges I have in my job now is this podcast because I get to pick the brains of incredible people like you. Look, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you for sharing so much, not just from an industry perspective, but also from a neurodiversity perspective, and for being that person that people can see being successful in their career, and so they know it's possible for them to do as well, and turning it into that superpower. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Paul for being on the podcast. I love hearing about how Uber is disrupting the advertising ecosystem and rewriting the rules to ensure they're delivering experiences that are not only good for the industry, but good for consumers. That's it for Identity Architects in 2024, but we'll be back in 2025. So all that leaves me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button to know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But until then, thanks for listening.